Does your family ever get exasperated with you for stockpiling such things as paper towels, bottled water, or toilet tissue? Well, they certainly can't object to you stockpiling money. Silver, the only money recognized by the U.S. Constitution, and your first 10-ounce bar of pure silver can be had at spot price with no premium by going to sdbullion.com/rp. And when you buy it that way, you'll be supporting Reluctant Preppers as well by going to sdbullion.com/rp. Thanks.
Dear friends, thank you for supporting this channel on Patreon to join our growing family of donors, now 59 patrons strong. And remember, once we reach 100 active patrons, we will start sending out a 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle, autographed by your host, Dunnigan Kaiser, to one active supporter each and every month. Thanks for taking a minute to pitch in by going to patreon.com/ReluctantPreppers and pledging your support today. Thanks very much.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a returning guest tonight who we're always glad to have back. He's of high interest to all of our viewers. Dr. Arthur T. Bradley is the host of DisasterPreparedness.com, the author of numerous books, both fiction and nonfiction, about preparing for emergencies and disasters, and post-apocalyptic drama as well. In my library, I have both the Disaster Preparedness Handbook, 2nd edition, Guide for Families, as well as the, get this right here, Handbook for Preparedness, for Practical Disaster Preparedness for the Family, 3rd edition. And these things are chock full of all kinds of charts and photos and all kinds of data and suggestions and priorities and checklists and how-tos and government statistics, and you got a very solid start from gathering information on what kinds of things to prioritize and put first when preparing. Dr. Bradley, thank you for joining us again here on Reluctant Preppers.
Sure, thank you for having me on.
Hey, we wanted to talk tonight, with your willingness, about financial preparedness. You've recently written an essay on 7 steps to financial preparedness, and as people look at physical preparedness, mental, emotional, networking, social, family preparedness, all kinds of different aspects of that, financial preparedness is a critical aspect that they need to consider, and you've put a lot of thought towards this, and we would really appreciate if you'd share your process of thinking this through to guide others, and tell us what we need to prioritize and put first, and what are the key steps to making sure that we are financially prepared and our families financially prepared to weather emergencies that may come.
Sure. So I'll start by just saying that basically everything we talk about tonight is right out of the Handbook to Practical Disaster Preparedness. So if anybody wants to get more detail, they can just take a look in that book. I really pulled the steps directly from there.
Okay.
So the first question I always ask anytime I undertake anything, especially if it takes money to do it, is why am I doing it, and is it worthwhile? And I think everybody is better served if they start sort of their ventures by asking that question. So in terms of money management, the question, I guess, that first question I would ask is, how does money management really fit into disaster preparedness? Because I think a lot of times people think of disaster preparedness as, stocking up on food, or, buying water filters, or
Sure.
Getting a gun, or things like that, right? The obvious sort of steps. But, money is sort of the seed that lets a lot of that be possible. And so I sort of identify 3 distinct roles that money plays in disaster preparedness. And they're all common. All of this is common sense, but just kind of nice to have thought through it. So the three roles I think that it plays is, one, of course, is that extra money gives you the ability to go out and purchase those emergency supplies, whether it's a big tank for the garage or some spare batteries, or, you name it. The money really allows you to have that freedom to stock up on those supplies. The second is that it's critically important that you have some kind of safety nets, and the first one everyone I'm going to encourage to establish, and we'll talk about it, is some kind of an emergency fund. And we can talk about how you do that and how much it should be. But, we have all of these daily surprises, and some of them are minor. The car needs to go in for an oil change. It, blew a gasket. We need to go have something done to it. And that's a type of expense. And then some are much more serious, like, maybe a hurricane comes through and takes out part of your house and you have to rebuild portions, and maybe part of that wasn't covered by insurance and so forth. And so having some form of emergency fund really allows you to deal with those unexpected pressures, and that will end up being the first and most important step that people should try and achieve, and we'll talk about those steps. And then the third one is really just setting in place some broader financial safety nets, and most of us already have many of those, things like life insurance and health insurance, but there are some others as well, and we can talk about some of the tricks and advantages of the different types of safety nets you can put into place. And all three of those things are really sort of driven by having enough money to do those things, to sort of protect yourself. And so money, I think, is, a key part of any kind of emergency preparedness. And so I try and make it a part of all of my discussions, even if it's not the primary focus. I try and make it a part of it. And one thing I want to just say on that introductory topic is that, all of us, for everybody listening, myself, you, everyone else, money's in limited supply, right? None of us have infinite supply of money, and so we all have to balance our books the way we know how. And no one should feel like that because they're pressed to make whatever payments they are and they have, very limited dollars left over, that they can't get better prepared. A lot of things you can do with a very limited amount of money. It can be learning to shore up your skills, or you can do things on a shoestring budget and do it over time. But so everybody should take steps regardless of sort of where they are in terms of their financial readiness.
What I hear you saying there is just because you may be on a really limited or tight budget is no excuse to say, well, I would take action, but I can't because I can't afford it. That's not realistically an excuse. Everybody can do something.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I often ask people the question, I've been told by people before, I don't have any money, I can't do anything extra. And I ask them, well, what would happen if tomorrow your boss said, we've had really tough times, I'm going to have to cut your salary by 10%. Would you immediately quit? Would you immediately lose your house? Would you immediately starve? And the answer is probably no to all of those. You would make do. You would figure out how to make do until things improved. So there's always a little bit of wiggle room in almost everyone's budget that they sort of allow themselves to spend because it's there. And if you set a little bit of that aside, whether it's establishing an emergency fund or doing other preparedness steps, you can over time get yourself better and better prepared.
And sometimes when people are faced with those real world situations like you mentioned, they'll do something like they'll call up, as we have, call up the cell phone company and say, hey, we need a cheaper plan. We just can't, this isn't realistic. Or the cable company, tell them the same thing. So there's sometimes restructuring you can do that will immediately carve out, whether it's $100 a month or whatever it is out of your budget. Now suddenly you've got options you didn't have before.
Right, exactly right.
So you made me think of Ben. We've had a guest on recently. Gregory Manarino was on talking about access to our funds. When you talk about having an emergency fund, one of the concerns that some of our viewers have had is real life experiences such as I've experienced, or now we've been getting mailings in the mail from our online savings bank saying that they're going to impose capital controls and transfer limits and that sort of thing that are completely arbitrary, subject to their control to change whenever they want. So part of people's emergency fund savings plan may be having some funds that are very close at hand for true emergencies where they might not be able to get access to bank funds on a short-term basis. But go right ahead. I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah, well, and you're right on that point, because keep in mind that, I use internet banks as well, but there are certain disasters that prevent you from getting your money out of any kind of banks whatsoever, right? And so having some immediate funds, whether it's in a safe in your house or whatever, can be crucial to getting out of danger or getting yourself shored up to survive something. So I guess the next topic for me is, how do you decide if you're financially prepared or not? What's the line that you cross that you go, oh, I'm there, I made it, I'm financially prepared now? And I think it's a fuzzy line. It's a little different for everyone. But I came up with a handful of questions that are really just more thoughtful questions, that people can ask themselves. And the first one is, are you living paycheck to paycheck? And I was absolutely surprised that I looked up the statistic on that. In the United States, it's about 78% of full-time workers answer that question with yes, that they are just living paycheck to paycheck, that they really feel like that all they have is, essentially what they make in their 2-week period, and then they spend it all, and then the next 2 weeks so they're literally just surviving on what they're making. And if if the answer to that question is yes, and evidently for a lot of people it is, then you're not really financially prepared. You're not ready for something unexpected to come along and disrupt your life, because how are you going to deal with it, right?
Okay.
Second question is, do you already have an emergency fund set aside that can handle some kind of significant expense? And those could be all kinds of expense, a medical expense, or like I said, something with your car or your home or whatever. The loss of a job is another type of unexpected expense. So if you don't have an emergency fund set aside, and a significant one, and we'll talk about what that is, then again, you're really not financially prepared. So those are the first two easy questions. I'll sort of buzz through a few of the others. Can you cope with financial difficulties caused by an extended illness in your family? So maybe it's not you, maybe it's your mother or your grandmother or an aunt or somebody who you care for, who you know doesn't have the ability to care for themselves. Are you able to, in some form or another, help them cope with that? What about if you or your spouse were to die suddenly? Do you have the proper safety nets that you can continue to live as you did today? And of course, that implies some kind of life insurance and some kind of plan in place. And the fifth one would be, an obvious expense. If your home or car were damaged, could you afford to make those repairs without losing your job, or without having some kind of extreme hardship on you because of it? And then finally, do you have a reasonable plan for retirement? I go to a lot of talks and I ask people that question, and there's always a person or two in the audience who jokingly says, "Oh, I'm going to win the lottery, so I don't have to worry about it." And I think we all fantasize to some degree about that, and on occasion I'll buy a dollar lottery ticket and say, who knows, right? But that's not a plan, and what we're talking about tonight is really having a plan. And so if you win the lottery, great. Throw the plan out the window if you want and have a good time.
You need a different plan at that point, yeah.
Yeah, it's a different plan, right? For most of us, though, we need to think about a long, sustained savings plan to where one day, whether that's at age 30 or at the age of 70, where we decide that we're not going to work any longer, that we can still maintain a quality of life. And so those are sort of the questions. If you don't have, if you can't answer yes to essentially favorably to all of those questions, where you have plans and you have emergency funds and you have enough money after your paycheck each month to save something, then you're really not financially prepared. You're not heading in the right direction. And so once you recognize that, and that's probably the hardest thing for people, is to just really accept that, I'm busting my butt, I'm working hard every day, but I'm really not getting anywhere. It's like a gerbil running around the hamster wheel. You just run and run and run. And I know people feel this way.
Yes.
And you really end up where you started at, right?
Right.
And that isn't what we want. And so what I tried to do was, and I'm not a financial advisor, I'm just a common sense person. I know, Dunnigan, you've got lots of experience and interviewed lots of guests on money. But I put together what I think is a simple 7-step, what I call the money plan. And sort of it's just good money handling things, and things you might want to think about if a disaster were to occur. These things might help you.
Okay.
So if you want, we can just talk through those 7. And
what's step 1? Yeah.
Yeah, so step 1 is maybe one people don't think about, and that is to just stay employed. If you look back historically, like at the Great Depression or other significant events, the people who come out the other side, the best, without a doubt, are the ones who manage to stay employed. And all of us think about saving our money and all of that, but actually being able to maintain a source of income is probably the most important thing you can do. So whatever the event is, if you manage to keep some form of salary rolling in, some kind of income, whether it's labor or whatever, that will help you greatly in staying fed and staying housed and keeping your family safe. And so I came up with a few ideas, and these aren't all inclusive, but just ideas to think about when things are going well or when they're not. One of the things you can do is assess your job stability now, right, before things get rough.
Okay.
And maybe consider, changing jobs. If you're in a job that's really susceptible to be lost, if anything goes wrong, then maybe you want to think about some other career options, even if they're just side career options that might be a little more resilient to either economic downturn or some kind of catastrophic event in the country. So that's number 1, assess your stability. Number 2 is make yourself invaluable to your employer. Now, by that I mean, I work at NASA throughout the day, and what I mean by that is to learn unique skills or gain important responsibilities within your organization. So be the go-to guy or gal that the employer knows this person has great value to me. I might have to let 10 people go, but that one I don't want to let go because they're really helpful to me in some way.
Right.
So become invaluable to your employee. That could be working extra hours or whatever, but something that makes you sort of exceptional above and beyond. 4 is similar. I just wrote become the dream employee. That's one of those do good work, show up on time, burn the midnight oil. Really become a role model employee. And it's a little bit different than what I meant about like learn unique skills and that sort of thing. This is just be the guy that shows up on time. Be the guy that puts in a little bit extra work so that, again, you're valued. And number 4 is if it looks like your company might have layoffs, and I've been in companies where I've seen lots of people laid off. One thing I noticed a couple of people do, and it served them well, was when the layoffs started, before they were called out, they went to the employer and said, hey, I love this job, and I'm valuable to this company, and I'm willing to take some form of lower salary or whatever the condition, or compromise in some way on my package to stay employed here while we tighten our belt and go through tough times. And just the fact that they were willing to do that put them in a slightly different category when the company was ranking people that they needed to get rid of. So it's something to think about, rather than just sort of be sitting at the desk waiting to see if the pink slip's coming. These people took it in their own initiative and said, hey, I'm going to let the employer know I'm willing to tighten my belt with them. And that actually helped them significantly. So, and then finally, the last one I had was establish some backup sources of income. And I'm sort of a poster child for that. Maybe you are as well, where maybe we have day jobs and I work all day long, but I look for other opportunities, not only to make a little money, but also to gain some skills and things, to do things I enjoy doing, which is why I write. I like writing books, not just to make a little money on the side. I enjoy writing. I enjoyed storytelling. I teach college on the side. Again, I enjoy learning, and it's just an extra benefit that those careers are separate and distinct from my main career. So that if something were, to affect that, I might still have some sideline sources of income.
It's a diversity. Yeah. Jerry Robinson, the author of, he's the host of FollowTheMoney.com and the author of The Bankruptcy of Our Nation, talks about having 21 streams of income. And when you started this whole section about number 1 was stay employed, what I was going to ask you is the key element there that you're after is stay connected to your sources of income.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. It doesn't have to be your main employer, but it has to be some streams of income. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's the first one, I think the most important one. Like you say, you really want to maintain some paths to bring in income during hardship. And step 2, I would argue, is the hardest. Maybe 1 is the most important and 2 is the hardest for folks. And that's simply, we always hear spend less than you make, right? You want to grow rich, you spend less than you make. And I think there's no exceptions to that rule. Maybe somebody could prove me wrong. But it means living below your means, whatever your means are. So if you make $50,000 a year, you have to live for less than that. You have to have some extra when you get done with all of your bills and all of your entertainment and everything else. And, people often say that they're going to do that. I'm going to live below my means. But it's so easy to fall into those syndromes where you're looking at your neighbor's cars and you're thinking, I need a car like he has. I need a, and it ends up you fall into the same category as the other people around you. And remember, 78% of the U.S. full-time employees say they live from paycheck to paycheck. Many of those people who, people sort of look out their window and say, I ought to be living like that person. Those are people in that category who really are living paycheck to paycheck. So,
another way of saying what you just said is that if we tend to look around and compare ourselves to others or emulate others, that 78% of the people in the country we do not want to emulate. So chances are we better be swimming against the stream rather than with the herd.
Yeah, exactly right. One way to tell if you're in that category, we went through ways of telling if you're financially prepared, but a really quick way to tell in terms of how you're doing on your saving is if you have short-term debt, if you carry short-term debt, which is credit cards, loans, small loans, things like that you're rolling from month to month. In other words, you're not able to pay them off. They've become a debt to you, right?
Okay.
Then you're not living below your means, right? Because at some point, or maybe you are today, but you weren't at one point, because you were at a position where you needed to borrow money to continue living along your normal means. And so that meant at some point you were overspending.
Sounds like our country.
Yeah, right. And if you look at our credit card debt, oh my goodness, right? It's a chronic problem. We have a terrible chronic problem with credit card debt. And so I don't dislike credit cards. We can talk about that later. But if you have some form of short-term debt, it should be a warning sign to you that you're probably not living below your means. Because below your means means that every month when you get done with your bills, you don't have a debt to pay. You have money to go into some kind of a savings account or some kind of investment account. So if you're not there, then you're not living below your means. And there's lots of ways. Yeah, there's lots of ways to change that, right? Everybody knows, right? You can increase your income. We talked about that, the various streams of income you can try and get, second jobs, small businesses that sell off your junk, whatever you got. And there's a million ways. There's tons of lists online of ways to save money, from dropping memberships and cable and, maybe drink your coffee at home instead of at Starbucks. There's lots of ways. So I won't go through that. But that's the way you have to kind of look at it is, what's my income coming in? How do I build that a little bit larger? And what's my expenses going out? How do I cut that down until the pipeline is more coming in than what's going out? I mean, there's no magic there. That's what you're after.
Yeah, there's a real trap in that. It's almost like we've been culturally conditioned by advertising and shows and, I don't know, everything. Maybe just our own fallen human nature too, that thinking, I want to think abundantly, or I want to think like a rich person or whatever, and they probably don't have to watch their expenses. So I won't have to watch my expenses, and that's because I'm well-to-do. I'm doing well. If I'm not watching my expenses, it's an indication that I'm doing well, and that really seems to be false-headed thinking, because we've certainly heard stories of people who win the lottery, or big sports stars, or celebrities, that sort of thing, who live licentiously and they just blow their money. It's gone there, and all of a sudden they're bankrupt again. Whereas we've heard the opposite of people who have modest streams of income, but by being frugal or whatever, watching what they spend, they're able to keep building and building and building, amassing some nest eggs. So it seems like a real pitfall we need to get past, that idea that to be doing well means you don't have to be watching your expenses.
Right. Yeah. No, I think you're right. And the other side of that, I think, is that many people falsely convince themselves that, well, I can't really do that mode yet. I can't go into the savings mode until I get a certain level until I get rich, right? Until I strike it big, I can't go into that mode of saving. And as you said, a lot of people, once a pattern develops, if you develop a pattern of overspending, it doesn't matter how much you make. You can make $1 million a year. You find a way to overspend it. And,
absolutely.
And the same way as if you're making $20,000 a year, if you're really a frugal person who values saving, you find a way to save a little. And so habits are something you want to develop regardless of your income level.
So what kind of saving techniques or approaches or benefits do you talk about?
Yeah, so, I'll just go right into step 3, because I think step 3 sort of addresses that a little bit. And people often ask, well, when you say saving, what do you mean, and how much are we talking? And many financial advisors advise similarly, which is to save anywhere between about 10 to 15% of your gross income. So if you're making $100,000 a year, you should be saving, and that isn't your take-home, but your gross. You should be saving $10,000 to $15,000 somewhere. It doesn't have to be in your 401k. It could be spread in lots of different ways in different places. It's interesting, if you go and look at the personal savings rate for the U.S. and you watch it over time, it varies greatly. It's very rapidly changing. Right now, it's currently only at around 3%. So that means that for every dollar people earn, they only save about 3 pennies of it in some kind of a savings of any sort, which is terrible, by the way. Some countries save 30% of their income. So we're terrible savers. Americans are terrible savers. I think most of us know that. But I think 10 to 15% is a reasonable goal, and I think you can get fairly well off, certainly financially prepared, doing that. And we talked about what are some of the benefits. The savings are a weird thing, as you probably know as a saver, I'm sure. As you start to save, it becomes fairly addictive, right? You start to see the nest egg grow, and then that nest egg sort of feeds itself, and it starts, you get interest on it, or maybe the investments start to return. And it in itself becomes a very satisfying use of your money. And so I encourage people, if they haven't saved, to really give that a try. I think you'll find, that it's addictive in its own way and in a positive way. There's some neat tools out right now. I don't want to talk about all of the online things. I'm not an online expert, but there's a tool called Acorns. You might know about that, might have heard about it. It's a neat little thing. I use it now. It's on my cell phone. It's a little app. And what happens is you can tell it, for example, every time you use your credit card, to round up to the nearest dollar and to save those pennies, that 35 cents or 61 cents, into a savings account, which then you can tell how you want it invested in the stock market or whatever you want. And you never see it, right? Because you just, well, my lunch is $5.30. Well, that extra 70 cents went into some savings account I never see. And over time, it's funny if you watch that, you'll see it go to, I got $100 in there. Oh, next thing, I have $500 in it, right? And it doesn't take that long for these pennies to add up. So anyway, things like that. There are others. I think there's some other accounts similar to that, but the Acorns is just one I'm most familiar with. So it's a neat passive way of sort of investing.
I have to give a shout out to David Morgan, who we've had on several times, who will carry around either 10th ounce or 1 ounce silver rounds and give them to people that he meets after, and it raises discussions with them, sometimes as a tip to a waitress or that sort of thing. And another person on our channel said that they always give their family members 90% silver coins in their Christmas stockings, that sort of thing. So sometimes having a physical, you mentioned the rewarding pleasure of and the satisfaction of seeing your savings grow. And a lot of the viewers on our channel are concerned that some of the places they could put their savings may not be as secure as they're being told. So sometimes stacking physical precious metals is a very tangible and rewarding way for either yourself or for family members to see that physically growing, no matter at any age.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, no, right. And I will admit that there was a time when I got, I guess, similar concerns. I think a lot of people who consider themselves preppers sort of take on that consideration, and so I did stockpile a little bit of silver as well. I'm a pretty big believer in the safety of our country's banking system. But with that said, it's kind of like we talked about before. If you can't get to your money, it really doesn't matter how safe it is. And so having a little bit of, tangible, something of some intrinsic value, I think makes sense. And certainly it is a great conversation starter because people, I'll give you an example. At my work, I get the benefit, and it's really a pleasure, of giving out annual bonuses to people who are great workers. And if I give them out as just part of their paycheck, right, it just rolls into their paycheck, nobody really notices. I mean, yeah, you got a little more that month, right? But it's just a number on a piece of paper, right? But if you give that money out, like you print out a certificate and you attach a little thing that shows what they're going to receive, and you hand it to them, person to person, right? It's much more real and tangible. They feel like they've received
and
something.
Meaningful.
Yeah, meaningful, right? Right. Now, if I could do it with $100 bills, right, or $20 bills, whatever, and count the money out on their desk, I can guarantee you they would feel the value of that bonus that they're receiving. So money's a funny thing, right? I mean, they're all the same numbers, but how you feel it and where it is to you sometimes make a big difference on what you value. So, so I'm with you on that. So I won't go into all of the details on savings. There's lots of savings plans people can go under. The big ideas are that you should establish an emergency fund first. I really believe that because life throws curveballs at everyone, right? The typical rule is 3 to 6 months of expenses. So, if you make $10,000 a month, it's a lot of money, then you should save between $30,000 and $60,000 so that you can sustain yourself and your family for that amount of time. If you only make $1,000 a month, well, then you really only need to save about $3,000 to $6,000. So it's a scaling sort of thing based on what income you bring in normally, because that dictates what your expenses are. So that's
quick clarification there. How does taxation figure into that? If normally when you say if you make say $10,000 a month or whatever, you're talking about your take home, because that's essentially your savings. You would already have paid taxes on that, so you can live right off that.
Right. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. This would be money that you took home. So. The view is that if you bring home $1,000 a month, then that's what you consider 1 month's worth of expenses, right? That's what you're spending. So 3 to 6 months of essentially what you're bringing home in income, and for every person that's a little different. Yeah. So establish an emergency fund, and there's no hard and fast number. I've heard people say much longer than that. I've heard people say 6 weeks. I think the 3 to 6 months is a broad range. People can deal with that how they want. The biggest thing, is, like we mentioned before, something breaking down that prevents you from getting to work, and now we violated our step rule number 1, which was stay employed, right? And we lose our job, and then everything unravels. So you want to have a way to stay employed, and having that emergency fund is one thing that can help you with. So once you get the emergency fund established, you say, well, all right, now I'm living below my means. I've established my emergency fund. That might take a year, 2 years to establish. But once it's established, it's there. You tap on it when you need, and you refill it as soon as it's been tapped on. And any extra money that you get in, you put in towards retirement accounts, right? And a lot of people work at places where they have employer matching. I do. And if you do, you put in as much as you possibly can to take advantage of the match. because typically that's a doubling of your money, right? You can't get any better than that.
Yeah, you don't want to leave any of that opportunity on the table.
Don't leave any of that on the table, so you at least put in as much as the match. And then let's say you have still more money. You're just really cracking down on the saving. You've got your matching in. You've established an emergency fund. The extra that you have then is you pay off your short-term debt. You slowly eat down those credit cards and those car loans and those other things that are short-term debt on you until you get all of those paid off. And again, this may take 5 years by the time you're at that point where you have no short-term debt, you have an emergency fund, and you have your retirement account, or you're fully funding it at the matching level. At that point, again, as you get rid of those expenses of the short-term debt, all of a sudden you have more money, right? More money available to play with. And that's when you start putting more into those retirement accounts or into special savings accounts that you might have. Maybe it's for a vacation or kids' college accounts. And if you have kids, you know how expensive, college accounts are. It's it's basically a second retirement type system. And so, again, those come in that next phase. Is after you start taking care of yourself, then you start thinking about those extra savings goals.
Looking at, you mentioned paying off debts. This is a real problem in a lot of households, right? Is credit card debt,
right?
And student loans and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I guess almost all of us have experienced that at one time or another. So in particular, I think those are the two biggest financial pressures on people right now, right? The kids that go to college come out with a tremendous financial burden, many of them, and they make money readily available. I know I have a daughter in college and a couple more getting ready.
Oh, my.
And they literally, make the money just very, very easy to get. And there's little choice in it, right?
It's very disconcerting to get the distinct impression when visiting these campus preview tours and parents' days and parents' weekends and all that sort of thing. He's like, are they selling education here or are they selling financing? Because it's just such an emphasis on that.
Yeah. So student loan debt is a huge problem. And if parents start early enough and they really start getting financially prepared early enough, they can save enough to pay for their kids' college without having to put the kids having to go into a financial debt like that. But it's not easy. It really isn't. College is very expensive. You have to make some trades here and there, maybe community college. My kids are all going to community college for 2 years before they go off to the big school. And why? Because it's a lot cheaper, and I think it helps them to mature a little bit. But so you make some trades, and you figure out how you navigate that student loan debt. It's it's a national problem right now that we're going to have to deal with. And as you said, the credit card debt is just so pervasive among everyone. They start pitching it to kids in college. They try and hook them into credit card debt very, very young. And then people can end up with, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 of credit card debt at very high interest rates that, it just becomes really an anchor hanging around their neck. And so the way I tell people is, you got to get yourself straight, and then you got to teach your loved ones, what it means to have good financial practices and to be financially prepared. And part of that is not to allow yourself to get in those situations of debt and to limit the debt that you do have. That's my step 4, is to limit your debt. And I usually, when I give a talk on financial things, I usually start by reading the Webster's definition of debt. And it's just simply this. It's just a few words. Debt is sin, trespass, something owed, an obligation, or a state of owing. And I ask people in the audience, I say, all right, now how many people would like to raise their hand who want that word to be used to describe them? And when you really look at those words, you think, my goodness, I don't want to be described in that way. I don't want to be that. And yet many people, many of us have allowed ourselves over the years to put ourselves in the debt of others. And so I really encourage people to think about debt in that way and to figure out how they can get out of it. It can't be done in an overnight. But it's something that can be done. It can be pulled. You can pull yourself out of it. You have to buck the system a little bit. I cite a statistic that the credit card industry, I love credit cards. I use credit cards constantly, but they're basically a pretty evil entity in the national picture. They send out 6 billion credit card offers a year just in the U.S. And if you have a mailbox, how often these credit card offers just come, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's more of that, I know it sounds too over the top, but it's kind of a financial enslaving.
And you mentioned in the definition, you said the state of obligation or the state of owing, and there's this sense of being disempowered. And I was taken back to, remember about, I don't know, 30 years ago or so, the ads, they had Jackie Gleason on for MasterCard, master the possibilities, the world is my oyster. Yeah. This idea that I have all the power and all the choices because I can use MasterCard, which is like, wait a minute, they're selling something that takes away your power as though it was giving you power.
Yeah, no, exactly.
So.
And some of the ads have been so great over the years to convince you that you become essentially more enabled by having credit cards. And again, I'm not knocking credit cards in general. We live in a plastic society where electronic transactions dictate much of our lives, right? I use credit cards for almost everything I buy. And the reason is very simple. There's buyer protection with them, right? There are extended warranties offered many times when you buy things. You can get rewards when you buy things. You have the best part of all, if you lose it, you're not obligated for what happens with it as long as you report it. So there's all these benefits to credit cards, but you have to recognize that they're a tool that can put you in a very dire financial situation if you don't use them correctly. And so if you can't use them correctly, don't use credit cards. Just live on a cash society if you have to, and that's the kind of life you need to live. If you use credit cards, the obvious, it's very easy to know how to use them. Everybody knows already. Get the best credit card you can, right? Good rates with the best possible benefits, and you can look at places like Credit Karma or NerdWallet and the ones that are out there. They're good. Use the credit card to make your purchases, right? Like I go to Costco, I make my purchase, and then always pay off the credit card balance every month, right? It's very, very simple, right? It's a rolling account that as long as every month you pay it off, it's only a net positive. The trick, of course, is that if you don't treat it as money, which of course it is money, then all of a sudden you receive a bill in the mail that you're going, oh, wow, I didn't realize I spent so much money this month. I can't pay that off. And then it quickly escalates and escalates. And before long, you're in this cycle of not being able to ever pay it off. It just continues to grow on you. And so credit cards are they have a good side and they have a bad side, and everybody has to find their way through this, or they're gonna go down that slippery slope and end up in real trouble.
So you've mentioned also in your book just the idea of getting more for your money when you buy anything, just making it go farther.
Yeah, I love that. That's probably my favorite of all of the steps, which is step 5, and it's get the most bang for your buck. And I think as people get wealthier, well, some people when they get wealthier they stop paying as close attention to that, and then others don't. I've always heard like Oprah Winfrey, will quibble over 35 cents or something, right? That she's very particular about getting the most bang for a buck. And I give 2 examples of that. One is my brother. I love my brother. He's a very successful lawyer, professor. And my mother, who is retired, but she was a elementary school teacher. And my mother is so frugal. I mean, so frugal. She will hit, the dollar store for everything she can. And I mean, she's just a very, very frugal person. Buys her clothes, at the Goodwill. I mean, just a frugal woman. And I always joke, if I gave $100 to my brother and gave $100 to my mother and said, hey, go out, and spend what you can on some clothes and bring them home, my brother would be lucky to come home with a pair of some pants and a tie. Maybe. I'm not sure he would do that. But my mother would come home with, a couple of dresses, a pair of shoes, some pantyhose, a new purse, and she'd have some money left in her pockets, So being frugal and figuring out how to use your money wisely is a really neat skill. I love it. I'm not going to say master negotiator, but I try. And I thoroughly enjoy the art of negotiation and getting the most for my money. Sometimes I'll argue over 75 cents, not in a mean way, but just to see if I can get the best deal, I love that.
Well, it is remarkable. I remember when I was having you mentioned back in the college section, and you haven't mentioned this, so I'll kick it in here, is the idea of that there are certain times, certain moments in your month or in your year or in your life where the smallest action comparatively can have a huge benefit. And I told our kids that when they were getting ready for college, like the applying for scholarships, that kind of thing. They spent a few hours here and a few hours there, and sometimes it did make hundreds or thousands of dollars worth of difference for them. I said, calculate the hourly rate of studying for that SAT exam versus the payback you got on it. Or another example is, like you were just saying, is if you're about to plunk down I recently had some medical procedure done. And I had had it done before at a completely different type of clinic, and it was only like $1,000 or $2,000. At this clinic, I got the bill back, and it was $11,000, and it was only for the first half of the procedure, which was going to be $21,000 by the time it was done. And I called them and said, "You got to be kidding me!" And talked to them, and after a little bit of talking, it was down by 20%. And so, you know, in that hour of investing, and then it came out, insurance also helped there as well. But sometimes just that being willing to enter into negotiation and saying, what can we do about this? How can we solve this? Because this is really a problem for me. If you look at the equivalent hourly rate, there's no job you could be doing that could be making you that same amount of money.
In fact, you know, one of the places people often, of course, they know they can negotiate is going to buy a new car, right? Everybody knows there's wiggle room, there's room for negotiation, and you know, I love buying new cars. I love it because I take it on as such a financial challenge to go in there and just get every nickel I can out of these people. And I have had, you know, I go in prepared for the afternoon, right? This isn't an hour thing. We're going to be here a while, right? And I love it. And they, in a sense, the salespeople come to love it too. Once they know you're not the guy that's going to roll in and pay the retail price or something. Oh, I'm going to save you $200 today. Once they know you're not that, they know you're serious. You're going to buy something, right? Now it's a question of, can we come to a fair exchange? And I've had managers come out and, you know, at the end of it, hours later, they'll come out and they'll say, I just want to shake this guy's hand. You know, I've never met somebody so chintzy. And you can't pay me a better compliment, you know. So that art of negotiation, get the most bang for your buck, I think is really valuable. Plus, it's kind of fun.
Well, I call my wife a super shopper because she really will plan that. Like now she's already planning what she's going to buy in January and February in these after Christmas winter sales when you know the big department stores are going to knock things down by 80% or 90% on some of those stuff. So she does that every year, and she'll get great, you know, toys for the grandkids or whatever, but she'll do it at an amazing discount. She just really is a super shopper.
That is fantastic. So step 6 is be adequately insured. And I think everybody pretty much knows. It's only a couple of things I wanted to hit on. Of course, everybody knows we need home insurance and auto insurance. The medical insurance is a funny thing now. You know, with the Affordable Care Act, there's so much uncertainty and all of that. It's a tricky thing to navigate, and I'm not an expert on it. It is funny you said that about you negotiating a lower payment for a procedure you had. That's something that a lot of people don't realize is possible. My mother had a similar experience. She had an accident, a car accident, and ended up getting injured. And she has very, you know, again, my mother's very frugal. She doesn't have a lot of money. She never made a lot of money. And she didn't want to spend what little bit she had managed to save over the years on one incident, right? It's just the blink of an eye. And so I said, well, don't worry, I'll see what I can do. And so I called up this hospital, and I said, yeah, you know, I see my mom's got a bill for $6,000 for, you know, something with her arm. And I just want to let you know I'm really sorry. You know, she's not going to be able to pay it. And they're like, oh, well, yeah, okay. I said, yeah, but, you know, I feel really bad. I said, she doesn't have any money. She's just, you know, destitute, completely destitute. But I want to help out, and I just want to do something to see if I can help out on this. And anyway, we got to talking, and pretty soon the $6,000 debt became well, if you'll send us $1,500, we'll wipe the debt away. And so then it's like, okay, now we're serious, right? I can come up with $1,500, and I want a letter from you stating that we'll completely remove the debt, and we negotiate all that out. And sure enough, we settled the debt for essentially 25 cents on the dollar. So it's possible to be done.
Wow.
It depends on the type of debt, of course, and on who's willing to do what. But in their case, they thought they were going to get zero, because on the side of the people who are responsible, they essentially think it's this old woman who has no money to her name, which isn't too far off the mark. And so they thought, well, here's a good actor coming in to help us. So that's just an example of, you know, there are times when even on things that seem like they shouldn't be negotiable, that they can be. And then the last two types of insurance, disability insurance is one most of us don't consider until it's too late. You know, 1 in 3 workers will become disabled. It's a weird statistic. You wouldn't think it's true, but I've looked it up many places. And disability insurance is an odd thing because it's pretty expensive. It doesn't cover your salary entirely, and it only covers it for a portion of time. So everybody has to kind of weigh, well, is this really worth it or not? I will say anybody who's ever used it has always said, man, this was so worthwhile. It saved my life. And everybody who has never used it has always said, what a waste of money. But, you know, that's true of most insurance, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, life insurance, and everybody knows they need good life insurance. Typically 5 to 10 times your annual salary is what people recommend. I like the 10 times number. It's easy to remember. Good term life policies is what I've always heard is the best way to go, and that's the rule I follow as well. So then the last step, so we don't get running too long here, is don't get scammed. It's probably the funnest of the steps. Funnest in the sense, funnest to talk about. And it's not fun to be scammed. I've known people who have been scammed, and it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And there's a few things I tell people about scamming. One is at the heart of every scam is the exchange of money or some other valuable asset. So if you find something leaving your hands, money leaving your hands, a car leaving your hands, whatever the thing is, you should be aware that you might be part of some kind of a scam, something leaving your hand of value. And then this age, with everything being electronic, there's so many ways to cheat people with payments, right? The cashier's checks or fake checks or wire transfers. A lot of people now are figuring out the only thing that's safe is cash. You want my car? Show up with some cash, right? And there's something to be said for that, although there's also some risk and dangers in cash money too. So you have to weigh that accordingly. I've sold lots of things over the years. Cars are terrible now. If you try and sell cars online, especially, there's a lot of scams going on. People offering to buy them sight unseen, and then they send you a check which you think is good, and you get your car picked up by some truck out in front, and your check ends up bad 6 weeks later, right? And you're out your car, right? So there's a lot of that going on you have to be very careful about. And the third thing to remember is that everyone's a target for scamming. You can be the old grandmother with $200 in the bank, or you can be the multimillionaire living in Manhattan. There's different kind of scammers that go after different kind of targets. And so don't think that, they wouldn't bother with me, or, I'm too smart for them. They'd never be able to scam me. I recently had a neighbor, and a very good guy, very smart guy, who's a doctor, and he was building a new house, and he hired what he thought was a reputable guy, really good, good Christian folk, talk the whole deal, hired him to put in an air conditioning system, and took his $10,000 and was gone. Left the state and everything, gone. Never got his money back. So it happens, even to good people. So I always tell people, look out for scams and teach your kids about them, and be skeptical on anything that you're paying for. There's a whole long list of scams that you can find out there that are, some of them are funny and interesting. Some of the funniest ones I like are if you get contacted by somebody saying that they're a hitman and that you've been, they've been hired to assassinate you, but if you pay them money, they won't.
Holy smokes.
That's a scam. You can report it to law enforcement, but it's one that's been around a little while. The newest one I've seen, and we've actually just gotten this in the last few days, is you'll get an email saying that somebody has video of you doing something inappropriate, whether it's looking at online sites or whether it's having an affair or something like that, and they have information about it that they're going to release to somebody. The only way it doesn't get released is a Bitcoin payment, because Bitcoin is the new way of scammers collecting money anonymously. And all of that is a scam. Nobody's got any information on you or anything like that. And what they manage to do is some of them use hacked information, so they may have a password of yours. So they may actually know your password. They may say, we know that your password was blankety blank, and it may be right. And so now you're convinced that, they really do know something about me. But again, they're just taking a piece of data from a hack and using it to try and convince you of something that they don't have. And so anyway, there's a long laundry list of scams, and it's like I said, it's heartbreaking when people get taken advantage of. I really encourage people to be skeptical when they're entering into any kind of transactions.
This really is a lot of food for thought and gives people a lot to go on. Again, you're saying that this same outline is available in your book if they want to find out more?
Yes, that's right. This and quite a bit more detail. Yeah, the same outlines are in there. And there's also some tables about, this is just discussing individual finances. There's also discussions in there about the national finances, right?
Absolutely.
The terrible condition that our country's headed. Yeah, and so if you're interested in financial preparedness at a national level or an individual level, I think you might find some of that information handy.
Well, Dr. Arthur Bradley from Disaster Prepare, if there's anything else that you want people to know about how they can find your work, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so two easiest ways to find me. You can just go to Amazon and search Arthur Bradley Disaster is a good way to do it. Or you can go to my website, which is disasterpreparer.com.
We've been speaking with Dr. Arthur T. Bradley, author of multiple books about disaster preparedness and widely followed speaker on the subject. Dr. Bradley, thank you as always for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
All right, thank you very much.